Hello everybody and welcome to this year's annual MScCCAFS Student Symposium. My name is Professor Charles Flann. I'm the Director of the Master's Programme in Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security here at NUI Galway. We'd like to welcome you all and particularly welcome our students who are about to give presentations on the various projects that they've been doing over the year. This year we've had a really wonderful, highly enthusiastic and talented class who, despite the COVID challenges, have done really excellently engaged with the program and also done superb projects. I suppose reflecting the diversity of student backgrounds, interests, and also our global partner network, the students have really done excellent research projects, and this year we've placed an emphasis on students conducting research that may lead to publishable outputs. Our theory of change for the CCAFS program is based really on the impact that our graduates generate when they leave the program and go on to work in different sectors and in different roles. And so using the knowledge and the skills they've developed during the program. So we really see the impact of the program is based on the people that the program generates and what they go on to do in terms of their work in climate change, agriculture and food security. As this year's class are now finishing their time with us, we wish them well for the future, and we do encourage them as alumni of the program to keep in contact with us and also with their classmates as a general kind of network. We'd also like to welcome our incoming MScCCAFS class, whom we look forward to meeting over the next while and engaging with the program and as the program begins for this academic year. We do hope that you enjoy the presentations at this year's symposium and that there'll be some research findings of interest to you. So at that, I'll hand you all over to the students and you can see the excellent research that they've been doing. Thank you.
Leah Banda, and my project is titled Climate Change Vulnerability and Mapping of Water Availability for Crop Production, the case of Chongwe watershed in Zambia. I was hosted by IITA. My presentation outline is as follows. I'll start with the introduction to the topic. I'll go into materials and methods. I'll dive into research findings, then conclusions, and I'll give the acknowledgements at the end. I will now go straight into the introduction. The impacts of climate change on crop water availability is becoming a serious concern globally. This has been caused by the changes in rainfall and temperature intensities, which have been exacerbated by increased anthropogenic development. The CMIP5 models under the representative concentration pathway 8.5 project an increase in drought scenario over Southern Africa by 2050. The performance of the agricultural sector has been badly affected. Therefore, my project sought to understand the hydrological components of the Chongwe watershed farming communities, which is key to optimizing water use efficiency and planning agricultural activities such as planting dates. So this slide shows a picture of the effects of drought on a maize crop in the Chongwe watershed, and this was taken in the year 2019. To understand the water supply and demand scenarios of the study area, I used the water evaluation and planning model in which I delineated over 5 million hectares of Chongwe watershed under one catchment area with 4 demand sites, which included industrial demand, livestock demand for water. Agriculture was divided into irrigated water demand and rain-fed water demand. Then I used 5 rivers for water surface runoff. The soil moisture method was used in this study. To run the analysis, I collected data from the Zambia Meteorological Office, from the Zambia Agricultural Research Institute, from the Southern Africa Science Service Center for Climate Change and Adaptive Management. The World Bank Climate Change Knowledge Portal was used for both rainfall and temperature data, and also I collected data from the Earth Data website for geological analysis. The results indicate that agriculture only takes up about 21% of the total land cover in the study area, while forest land occupies more than 50%. And on the other hand, open water bodies only occupy 0.1%. This could be indicative of the limited surface water storage bodies in the study area. Detailed analysis of hydrological component indicated that total amount of rainfall that is likely to be received in the future scenario might reduce by 50%. Evapotranspiration was also noted to be the highest source of water outflow from the study area. When we analyze the abstraction rate in both scenarios, we see that in the future scenario, more water is likely to be abstracted to the amount of rainfall that will be received. This is clearly indicative of the high demand that is projected in the future scenario. This slide shows the monthly distribution of rainfall in the study area. As it can be observed, the main rain season will continue to range between November and March. As can be observed, the month of January will continue to record the highest amount of rainfall in both scenarios. The distribution of effective precipitation is key for crop production, and our analysis shows that about 33% of actual rainfall will be effective precipitation in the future scenario, and the month of January is observed to record the highest amount of effective precipitation at an amount of about 194 millimeters per year. Furthermore, I went into analyzing the crop water requirements for the study area, and from these results we see that the mid-growth stage of the crop is very crucial, as it requires the highest amount of rainfall in the production cycle of the crops. Therefore, it's important that farmers plan their production to a level that the mid stage is reached during the month of January, when the area is likely to receive the highest amount of effective precipitation. In conclusion, the results indicate a decline in crop water availability for maize and cassava compared to soybeans and groundnuts. Therefore, intercropping of maize and cassava production systems with soybeans and groundnuts will be key. Further, breeding of evapotranspirative resistant varieties of crops will be integral to achieving food security in the study area. However, it's also prudent that further investigation be undertaken in the study area to investigate the carbon sequestration potential of the forestry land cover. I'd like to say thank you to my supervisors from NUIG and from the host institution, which is IITA, for the technical support that they rendered to me during this project. And I would also like to thank the Irish Aid for the financial support that has enabled me to undertake this project. Lastly, but not the least, I'd like to thank Dr. Tena and Dr. Kawawa Banda for the support rendered with regards to use of the model. Thank you.
Hello everyone listening to this presentation. I am Philemon Chipanshi Chirumba, a candidate for the degree of Master of Science for Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security. My presentation is based on the topic, what parameters of women's empowerment can be advanced through small ruminant projects in sub-Saharan Africa. This topic was carefully selected within the confine of the Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security, CCAFS, and therefore I chose it as a topic for my thesis. In order for me to carry out this research work, I worked with the Ryan Institute at the National University of Ireland, Galway, that is NUIG, and in addition, I collaborated with two partner organizations in Ethiopia, and that is to say, the International Livestock Research Institute, that is IWRI, as well as the International Center for Agriculture Research in the Dry Areas, ICADA. Now, this work that I'm presenting is actually based on a literature review, and the others contributed immensely in the authorship of this article. This is the more reason why it is cited as Chipanshi et al. 2021. What was the motivation for carrying out this research? Well, the objective for this research work was twofold. The first objective was to profile parameters for measuring gender equity and women empowerment in small ruminant livestock programs. This would actually help to differentiate rhetoric from reality. Now, this is important because in sub-Saharan Africa, empowerment word has emerged a buzzword. And so we wanted to find out as to whether those small ruminant projects are indeed achieving the targeted goals. And then the second objective was to establish analysis of the level and scale of equity and empowerment outcomes of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. We are well ahead in the time to reach 2030, and so we tried to assess the achievements which have so far been done, especially with regard to goal number 5, which is on gender and women empowerment. Now, what were the methods that we used in order for us to come up with an article of a literature review? Well, first of all, we looked at the research question, which is the topic of this project. What parameters of women empowerment can be advanced through small ruminant projects in sub-Saharan Africa? And to answer that question, we had to come up with 3 sub-questions, and these sub-questions are as follows. Number 1, what parameters of change are impacted by small ruminant development interventions in smallholder livelihood system? And the second one, we were trying to look at the tools that are being used to measure women's empowerment in smallholder livelihood system. And so we said, what parameters are these tools using? And lastly, we also tried to profile what evidence is there that women empowerment is actually impacted by small ruminant production projects that are in sub-Saharan Africa. And so, in order for us to find answers to these questions that we have raised here, and we had to look at literature in electronic form. Yes, both the peer-reviewed and the grey literatures were collated using databases such as the Academic Search Complete, the CG Space. Now, the CG Space, this is where you find a lot of journal articles, surveys, and reports about the operations of URI. And then we also looked at FAOSTAT to just try to see the population levels of small ruminant livestock in sub-Saharan Africa. In order for us to appreciate the science and technology that is supporting the sector small ruminant livestock production, we also looked at the databases such as Scopus and Web of Science. Lastly, we also made use of Google Scholar. Google Scholar actually helped us to look at the various journal articles and bring out the literature review, and then be able to see whether that journal article was in line with our questions, and if it was so, we selected it. At the same time, the Google Scholar was quite useful, especially when writing the references in conjunction with endnotes. What then were the findings? Well, the findings are that small ruminants are indeed benefiting the rural communities of sub-Saharan Africa. For example, food, that the small ruminants provide milk, they also provide meat. These products are very important in providing the needed nutrition to help control malnutrition, especially in children. Then we find that these small ruminants also, when there is need, especially when there are droughts, when there are floods, these animals can easily be traded for other food substances that may be lacking by some family holds. Economically, this small ruminant could be sold easily, and the farmers are able to raise some income, and the small ruminants can actually provide manures for the good health of the soil, and the small ruminants can also be a form of insurance during difficult times. The FAOStat provided us information about the levels of population of the small ruminants in sub-Saharan Africa. According to the FAO report in 2019, over 8.6 billion heads of sheep and goats combined were reported in sub-Saharan Africa. Now, these animals we have talked about can be segregated to see how many were goats, how many were sheep. And so when we looked at that, we found that the margin was very small, about 6%. Of course, the goats were more, they were 53%, and the sheep were 47% only. Other findings that we got was that it is not clear as to whether gender equity and empowerment benefits are being realized by both men and women in small ruminant livestock programs. This is because most of the surveys that are conducted in sub-Saharan Africa are qualitative surveys, and so it is not easy to really actually profile the numbers of how many women, how many men are stepping out of agriculture or are stepping up of agriculture or any other form of empowerment that we can cherish to see. Because of this, we tried to profile appropriate parameters that can be advanced for quantitative surveys in sub-Saharan Africa, so that we are able to see the benefits for men, the benefits for women. And these parameters include the 7 domains, that is food security, access to resources, leadership, agency, control of income, access to and control of opportunities, and control of workload time. We want to incite all of you that this article that we are talking about, literature review, is targeted for publication in the Gender, Technology and Development journal. So once it is published, please read it and see these domains and parameters in detail and see how they can be helpful. In conclusion, we want to make this statement that given that the consequences of climate change, consequences of population increase, consequences of women who are the head of households, these factors are irreversible in sub-Saharan Africa. And so to solve poverty, we need to work very hard. and we need to focus mainly on gender equality. This is very important, especially when it comes to climate change, that the efforts of climate change, adaptation and mitigation will not occur if one group remains behind, say the women are left out or the men are left out. For this reason, we have suggested that for the developmental projects that can take place in sub-Saharan Africa by the non-governmental organizations and governments, they should try to profile and try to assess the benefits that will be there in real terms using some of these parameters that we have flagged out in this literature review. And these can be used for surveys, and then we see how this can contribute to the development of the region. In acknowledgement, I would like to acknowledge and thank my supervisors at the Ryan Institute of the National University of Ireland, Galway, and I would like to thank the following people. First, I want to thank Professor Charles Spillane, for his knowledge and wisdom that he provided. This provided the roadmap for the project. This work, I should say, would not have been completed had it not been his guidance. That was quite useful. Secondly, I would like to thank the coordinator for the CCAFS program at Ryan Institute, Dr. Peter McKeon, that he also provided useful guidance, especially giving me steps for how I should carry out this research, and at the same time he also provided useful edits to the work that I was doing. Additionally, I also want to thank Dr. Una Murray, the gender specialist and lecturer at Ryan Institute. She provided valuable resources on gender and women empowerment, which has contributed to what we find in the article that we have written. And at the same time, she also played a very big role in editing the article as well. Lastly, but not the least, I would want to say that this study that I've undertaken at this prestigious university, the National University of Ireland, Galway, would not have been possible had it not been for the funding that I received from the Irish Council for International Students, ICOS. I want to be so grateful for the funding that was provided in this regard. I also want to thank the staff at ICOS who cared for my welfare during my stay in Ireland. I want to reiterate to the government of Ireland that indeed I'm very grateful for the education that they have given me, and I want to implore them that may they continue to help even others to be able to get this kind of education, which is not possible, especially for some of us who come from countries with limited resources. For this, I would like to use a statement from one of the local languages in Zambia, Bemba, to say "Eya mkwai tuatasha," which simply means thank you all. And this is the end of my presentation. I thank you.
Hi everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Dr. Peter McKeon, and I'm the coordinator of the MScCCAFS. Over the last few years, this program has grown to be quite successful and to produce graduates who have gone on to have careers in many walks of life all around the world. We're particularly proud of the fact that our students have been able to benefit from interdisciplinary training, which provides them with the skills that we need to face up to all the sort of challenges that humanity is going to have to get to grips with in agriculture and in global food security. And these require new ways of thinking and interdisciplinary approaches. We like to think that we're able to learn from each other, and we're very happy that a number of our alumni have come back to also teach into our course in later years, as well as continuing to collaborate with faculty and collaborators to research and publish. This is particularly evident in the course projects, which are generally based with partner organisations, such as those connected with the International Agricultural Research Institutes of CGIAR, in partner organisations in Europe, in Ireland, in many different sorts of institutions. And our aim is that every student produces something which is publishable, useful, not just a thesis, but also something that makes a real impact. And over the last few years, we've been developing what has been termed a theory of change about how we actually hope to see the course producing graduates and levering networks and developing skills that actually do, in one way or another, make a difference. That's what we're about. As well as our connections with CG, we're also very happy to have the continued support of Irish Aid, who help to provide scholarships for students to come to Ireland and study from many of the countries who are facing the brunt of climate change related crises. Please follow us for the latest news on our Twitter handle and keep in touch with us. And welcome to those students who are arriving, and it's great to see all of the work from the students who are just completing their projects. We're really proud of you. As I say, our theory of change is that you go out and actually make a difference, and we've really enjoyed learning from you and from benefiting from your insights and experiences. It's been, as we all know, a very particular year, and it continues to be challenging times, but you've really risen to the occasion brilliantly. And thank you for all of that. And thanks to everyone for listening. Cheerio.
Hi everyone, my name is Melanie and my research project focused on the following: the contribution of rural youth to climate issues in agriculture and their engagement in climate policy. To help you understand how this work was carried out and the results that came out of it, here is an overview of my presentation. First, I will present the interesting links between youth and climate. Then, the research method, the results that have emerged before concluding with the main elements. In 2018, at the age of 15, Greta Thunberg protested in front of the Swedish Parliament against climate inaction. She led thousands of young people in more than 100 countries to fight for the climate. What we do or don't do right now, me and my generation, can't undo into the future. This sentence illustrates the importance of action today, the importance of youth in the face of climate change. But then, what is climate change? Who are these young people we are talking about, or not talking about? In scientific articles, it is difficult to find a consensus to qualify youth. There are different opinions on the age range, social situation, and economic situation. In this research, we have chosen to follow the UN's definition. Young people are people aged between 15 and 24. Climate change is understood as any change in climate over time, whether due to a natural variability or as a result of human activity, according to the UNFCCC. Thus, Time is an important commonality between climate change and young people. Young people are victims of temporal climate injustice. They are not the main perpetrators of the crisis, but they will pay the consequences. They are the last ones who can act. However, how can they act alone? How can we act if we are not given the space to do so? Rural youth, mainly in developing countries, are among the most marginalized young people facing a number of difficulties. Among them, the lack of attractiveness of the agricultural sector. The hypothesis is that the contribution of rural youth to climate issues depends on the policies implemented, and the lack of engagement of rural youth in climate change policy is impacted by the lack of attractiveness of the agricultural sector. To try to address this hypothesis, the research method applied in this article was a systematic literature review. Keywords and search strings queries were searched on Scopus and Web of Science. Youth, climate change, policy, agriculture, rural development, and strategy were applied as keywords. In the first search, in May 2021, 327 articles were found. After a first screening, the number of articles was reduced to 45. Then, after reading these articles, the final number of articles selected in this work was 20. The first result of this work is that rural youth need to be sensitized to take innovative action. Young people have a higher level of education than their parents, and we have seen that they are victims of climate change. These two findings could be a motivation for them to contribute fully to climate policies. However, they lack the space to express their voice. The motivation and energy that young people possess must be stimulated if they are to be used properly. This requires raising awareness of climate change and its consequences among young people, especially rural youth, and encouraging innovative thinking. Through the use of technology, law, engineering, and education, young people are able to develop skills and build on those they already possess. In this type of model, rural youth then contribute concretely to climate issues by implementing sustainable agricultural practices, sharing and communicating their knowledge, and engaging in politics and organization. Their innovative way of thinking is then put forward, allowing them to gain confidence in themselves and in their skills and giving them the desire to become even more involved. It is a virtuous circle. To maintain this virtuous circle, a second result emerged. Policies are in place to address the issues of rural youth, but not enough. As we have seen, rural youth face many issues. Among them, the most recurrent are unemployment, access to land and capital, lack of knowledge, and a pessimistic relationship with climate change and agriculture. To invest these young people in climate policies, it's important to take these issues into account. They are part of their daily lives. To do so, several solutions and policy frameworks are recommended. These include the establishment of policy frameworks promising sustainable jobs, accessible financial services, encouraging the teaching of climate change knowledge in schools, and including welfare and health support for farmers. Some of these proposals are already being implemented in programs and policies at governmental, intergovernmental, and NGO levels. Among them, we can mention FAO's Junior Farmer Field and Life School to, among other things, generate outcomes, as well as the Youth Enterprise Development Fund in Malawi. The Youth Climate Summit on 2019 as an advocacy forum, or the IFAD Action Plan Rural Youth 2019-2021 sustainability oriented. The results of these programs and policies are encouraging so far, and still need work to be fully convincing and sufficiently developed. This brings us to the third result of this research. Some factors facilitate the contribution of youth, others limit it. These factors can be internal. They come from the young people themselves, from their perception of the world, from their identity. They can work on themselves to change these factors. Among these individual limiting factors is the negative perception that rural youth have of the agricultural sector. On the other side of the scale, as a facilitating factor, we can find the double challenge they face, being victims of climate change while having little room to express themselves. This has stimulated a lot of engagement. From another point of view, there are external factors. That is, they come from the environment, from outside, from education, from family. Young people need support and guidance in order to overcome them, or to take them on. Among these external limiting factors, rural young people are among the most vulnerable to inequalities. They are mostly excluded from most agriculture-related decision-making. Adults and young people have negative perception of youth, with cliché and established way of thinking that are difficult to change. For young people who are alone and isolated, it's even more difficult to access land and any productive resources, among other things because of institutional barrier, as we have seen. Finally, in the bodies where young people are represented, in the UN climate negotiation, for example, there is such a variety of group categories of young people that there are great inequalities in their representation. The reality of the daily life of all young people cannot be communicated. It is therefore not heard, and the issues it includes cannot be addressed. On the other hand, democracy or a positive and encouraging political framework for young people, the empowerment of young generation of farmers, for example, through the establishment of cooperative or a high level of education, facilitate the integration of young people and their issues into political bodies, as well as their contribution to climate change consideration. To conclude, if you were to take away only 4 things from this presentation, they would be the following. The agricultural sector lacks attractiveness for young people. It is therefore difficult for young rural people to stay in rural areas and to project themselves in the agricultural sector. But rural youth have a lot of potential and interesting skills in sustainable agriculture and climate policies. They just need, for the most part, support and guidance to develop them and show them to the world. However, the lack of consideration of young people in the implementation of climate and agricultural strategies and policies is evident and makes it difficult for them to contribute to their implementation today. For these policies, strategies, programs, or action to be relevant and appropriate, they need to be multi-sectoral, taking into account the different aspects of the lives of rural youth, health, social, financial, education, but also taking into account rural-urban migration and gender issues. And if finally you want to remember only one thing, it is that it's not too late to act and meet the SDGs. We must seize the skills of young people and give them the space to exist so that they can contribute to climate issues in agriculture and become involved in climate policies. Finally, I would like to thank Charlie, Peter, and Una from the NUI Galway and Jean-François from CIAFS for their guidance during this research work. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Marie Duffy and I'm here today to talk to you about my thesis. But first, a little bit of background about me. I'm from Galway. I grew up on a farm and this is where my interest in agriculture and the environment came from. I completed my undergrad in agriculture and environmental management in GMIT. There was a focus on climate change in this course and that inspired me to complete the MScCCAFS course. The title of my thesis was Mapping Policy Coherence between Climate Security, Agriculture and Migration Domains in Ethiopia. Why did I pick Ethiopia? Why not Ireland, England or even Spain? I picked Ethiopia because it is located on the Horn of Africa. Ethiopia has a population of 94 million people. It suffers from both inwards and outwards migration, and agriculture is the main source of employment in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a relatively poor country. It has suffered in the past due to famines and drought, and also due to political instability. In order to ensure sustainable development in Ethiopia, policy coherence is required across policy sectors. But what is policy coherence? Glass 2019 described policy coherence as the systematic promotion of mutually reinforcing policy actions across government departments and agencies, creating synergies to achieving the defined objectives. Policy coherence can have a positive impact on a person's well-being because it reinforces individual policies by exploiting positive synergies across economic, social and environmental policy areas. So I assessed policy under the 5 domains that are listed here: migration, food security, conflict, agriculture and climate. All these policies, as you can see here, are interconnected by the arrows. But is this considered in policy documentation? So this was the aim of the thesis. It was to test the hypothesis that while many policies are implemented in Ethiopia, there is not policy coherence between all these political policies and strategies. Research methods. So the first thing that had to be completed was the identification of policies in Ethiopia. This was achieved through a simple Google search. Policies pre-2010 were excluded because they were no longer deemed relevant. The first area that was researched was policy coherence within the policy documents. This was achieved using a keyword search across all the policies and using the Control-F function. Based on the number of times the keyword was mentioned, a colour was assigned to achieve a traffic light illustration, and there's an example of this on the left-hand side. So in the GFSS, which was the Global Food Security Strategy, the keyword agriculture was mentioned 48 times. The second research area was policy coherence across policy documents. So this was if a policy mentioned any other of the 19 policies that were analysed in this study. This was achieved through using the Control-F function within all of the policy documents and searching all of the policy names within that document. And the third research area was the mention of the term policy coherence. So each policy was searched using the control function to see if it contained the keyword policy coherence. So here are some of my results. Table 1 shows the results from climate change policies and strategies in Ethiopia. The first thing I will discuss in this table is the meanings of the abbreviations because I was not able to fit the full names. So CRGE stands for the Climate Resilience Green Economy. GTP2 stands for the Growth Transition Plan 2. The CRSAF stands for the Agriculture and Forestry Strategy. The INDC stands for the Intended Nationally Determined Contributions. The REDD is not shortened, but it's the RED Strategy. The NPSDRM is the National Policy and Strategy on Disaster Risk Management. The CCSESE is the Climate Change Education Strategy of Ethiopia. And the NAP is the National Adaptation Plan. So from this table, we can see that climate change is mentioned across all policies, all the climate change policies, but climate impacts is only mentioned in 2 policies. Mitigation is also mentioned across all policies. The most coherent policy appears to be the Climate Resilience Strategy on Agriculture and Forestry. In Table 2, the Peace-Building Policy Strategy of Ethiopia was analysed. The keyword peace was mentioned 115 times and the keyword conflict was mentioned 126 times. But it was interesting to note that the keyword security was not mentioned. On this slide, we can see the results from the migration policies and the agricultural policies. So first, I will discuss the migration policies shown here on the left-hand side. Climate change was not mentioned in any of the migration policies, which perhaps suggests an incoherency. Migration was only mentioned once, as was social status, but it was interesting to note that women was mentioned across all policies. The most coherent policy for the migration domain appeared to be the Overseas Employment Proclamation 2016. Table 4 shows the results from the agricultural policies. So we can see that greenhouse gas emissions is not mentioned in the agricultural policies. This to me at first shocked me because in the developed world there is a keen focus on the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. But I then discovered that the greenhouse gas emissions in the developing world is not required until well into the future. There was also a lot of coherence across the 2 policies on mitigation and adaptation strategies, and there was a significant and strong focus on climate change. The most coherent policy under the agricultural strategies was the National Strategy for Ethiopia's Agricultural Extension System. This slide shows the results from the food security strategies and from the graph from the policy coherence within documentation. Firstly, I will discuss the food security strategies. Similar to the agricultural strategies, there was no mention of greenhouse gas emissions across any of the policies on food security. Nutrition was mentioned across all the policies, as was agriculture, but climate smart agriculture was only mentioned in the nutrition sensitive agricultural strategy, but not in any of the other policies. So because there was not enough space in this table to include the full name of these policies, I will now just tell you what they are. So the GFSS is the Global Food Security Strategy. The NSAS is the Nutrition Sensitive Agricultural Strategy Plan. The FNPE is the Food and Nutrition Policy of Ethiopia, and the NNP is the National Nutrition Programme. The most coherent policy within the food security policies is the Global Food Security Strategy. As mentioned in the methods earlier, I searched to see if policy was mentioned, if the names of the policies were mentioned within the policies. So I was not able to include the table from this, as it is a massive table, as you can imagine, but I can tell you that there was limited or no results for this. The climate resilience and green economy strategy appeared to be the most coherent, as it mentioned the most policy names. Figure 1 shows the policy coherence across the 19 documents. So this was where the documents were searched for the term policy coherence. So policy coherence was not mentioned in 17 policies, but was not mentioned in 16 policies, but was mentioned in 3. The conclusions. So from my results, I concluded that there appeared to be limited coherence or partial coherence within and across the policy documentation in Ethiopia. As Ethiopia is vulnerable to climate change, it is essential that coherence among the policy sectors is ensured to ensure sustainable development and ensure the implementation and successful implementation of policy. I did I thank my supervisors, Dr. Peter McKeon and Professor Charlie Spillane, for all their guidance and advice throughout my thesis. I thank Greta and Franz from CGIAR, who aided in my learning and understanding of the topic of migration. And I also thank my family for their constant support and guidance throughout my education. Thank you for listening.
Hi everyone, I'm Amy Ferguson and the title of my MScCCAFS project is Remote Sensing Enabled Biomass Climate Adaptation Index for Agricultural Systems. The Paris Agreement outlines adaptation to climate change as a primary goal. The agricultural sector is particularly vulnerable to climate change and therefore is a key focus. Adapting agricultural systems and building their resilience is especially important as this ties directly to food security and the livelihoods of millions of people worldwide. Adaptation in agricultural systems can fall under two main categories, transformational and incremental. Incremental adaptation refers to small changes made to an existing farming system, such as switching to different varieties of crop. Incremental adaptation does not eliminate the threat of climate shocks, but is seen as a safe route with minimal risk involved. Transformational adaptation refers to a change in the purpose or location of a farming system, which can move a system away from the immediate danger of a climate shock to foster greater resilience. Despite this, they are often more expensive and carry greater risk for farmers. Moving from incremental to transformational adaptation is not necessarily linear. For example, systems can undergo incremental adaptation after transforming. With this in mind, incremental and transformational adaptation can be viewed in a cycle, with decision makers undertaking monitoring and evaluation to progress forward with a new adaptation route. Tracking systems are crucial aspects that must be considered when developing adaptation plans. This has been recognised by the Paris Agreement, which requires countries to submit nationally determined contributions and national adaptation plans to maintain transparency. Tracking systems refer to monitoring and evaluation procedures using process and outcome-based indicators to assess how an adaptation has performed, to highlight areas that may be underperforming to prioritise in future planning, and to direct finances more appropriately. Despite this, there are issues involved with the use of indicators. Firstly, there is a lack of globally accepted indicators available to track adaptation. It is often difficult to establish a baseline to compare an adaptation to a counterfactual situation. If data is collected using surveys, these can be time-consuming and expensive to implement, and results can take months to become available to end users. Lastly, frameworks can contain too many indicators and therefore lose relevance. This has led to calls for more innovative tracking mechanisms, and technology such as remote sensing and artificial intelligence are key suggestions for potential routes forward. Satellite remote sensing is used extensively in the agriculture sector as it can gather a lot of information from different geospatial locations and represents an impartial and reliable method of data collection. The Normalized Difference Vegetation Index is a measure of biomass productivity. The NDVI equation requires inputs of red and near-infrared light absorbed and reflected by vegetation, and this can be collected by satellites. NDVI values across a growing season produce a time series, such as this one in the top right. From this time series, various metrics can be derived, such as the maximum NDVI and the length of the growing season. NDVI metrics have been used in the agricultural sector to monitor agribiomass productivity and assess the resilience and stability of ecosystems after a shock, therefore providing the basis for the Tracking Adaptation in Agriculture and Food Security project, also known as the TAPAS project. The development of a Biomass Climate Adaptation Index is the main focus of the TAPAS project. The Biomass Climate Adaptation Index requires inputs of observed NDVI values from areas undergoing adaptation and predicted NDVI values from deep learning algorithms which represent the counterfactual baseline situation that would occur without the adaptation. The difference between these values produces a score on the index between -1 and 1, which can be tracked over time to monitor the progress of an adaptation. This graph represents a schematic Biomass Climate Adaptation Index. It shows that a significant increase in trend could represent a successful adaptation, and a significant decrease in trend could represent an adaptation that is failing, meaning that a transformation could be considered as an alternative adaptation route. The Biomass Climate Adaptation Index is expected to be used by a diverse range of end users at differing spatial resolutions, therefore requiring different satellites. MODIS is an appropriate satellite for global, national and regional scales, as this satellite has a spatial resolution of 250 meters. At a local scale where small holdings may be monitored, satellites such as Sentinel-2 and Landsat are more appropriate, as they have resolutions between 10 and 60 meters. On a global and national scale, governments can use the Biomass Climate Adaptation Index to track adaptation progress required by NAPs and NDCs as part of the Paris Agreement. NAPs aim to facilitate long-term planning, including plans for transformation if necessary. The Biomass Climate Adaptation Index can therefore assist governments when deciding if a transformation is necessary in a particular area. Financing mechanisms can also use the Biomass Climate Adaptation Index to track investments and identify areas to direct funds. At a regional and landscape scale, end users such as regional governments, private sector companies and NGOs can utilise the Biomass Climate Adaptation Index to devise landscape level plans and ensure appropriate planning of both incremental and transformational adaptation. At a local scale, end users such as farmers and farmers' organisations can use the Biomass Climate Adaptation Index as a means of precision adaptation to identify specific areas underperforming to create evidence-based tailored adaptation plans. Aside from the agricultural sector, other applications of the Biomass Climate Adaptation Index include monitoring of the assisted migration of tree and plant populations and the productivity of oceanic and land-based carbon sinks. The development of the Biomass Climate Adaptation Index is still in early stages. However, relevance and accessibility to end users are key considerations during these stages. Firstly, many papers identify attribution as a key barrier faced by tracking systems. For example, it may be difficult to infer if an adaptation is the sole cause of an increase or decrease in Biomass Climate Adaptation Index score. This therefore requires a robust baseline, which we aim to achieve through the development of deep learning algorithms. However, we also hope to provide a means to integrate other data, such as economic data, into the TAPAS interface. This ties into the next barrier. The Biomass Climate Adaptation Index will not be able to account for socio-economic factors associated with the outcome of an adaptation. This means that end users will still need to rely on traditional methods such as surveys, which, as previously mentioned, are time-consuming and expensive. A potential solution is the integration of crowdsourcing in the TAPAS platform to allow end users to easily input results relevant to other indicators. Another potential barrier is the digital divide apparent throughout the world, whereby some regions have lower bandwidth speed. Some regions of the world might also not have the capacity to use remote sensing technology. Potential solutions for these barriers include the creation of a mobile phone platform that could be accessed in areas of low bandwidth, as well as the development of central biomass climate adaptation index platforms. A recent report from the Adaptation Committee acknowledges that adaptation monitoring systems should hold flexibility to allow the integration of new and improved data collection methodologies. The TAPAS Biomass Climate Adaptation Index is presented here as one innovative solution that can be adopted by various end users to track and assess the productivity of agri-biomass associated with adaptation interventions. Ultimately, the Biomass Climate Adaptation Index can provide evidence for decision-making and incremental and transformational adaptation planning in the threat of intense climate change impacts. So thank you to my NUIG supervisors Charles Blaine and Peter McKeon and the rest of the TAPAS team for their support, and to Science Foundation Ireland and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade for funding the TAPAS project.
Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Una Murray. I'm a lecturer at NUI Galway in the geography discipline. I coordinate and teach a module on gender, agriculture and climate justice for this Masters in Climate Change, Agriculture and Food Security. And that module focuses on the impact of climate change on different groups. So we analyse how climate change does not affect all in the same way, and it's important for us to understand the social impacts of climate change, as much depends on resources, livelihood options, ability to adapt or mitigate, information, capital, knowledge, and of course, the ability to take decisions. So we look at climate change from a social impact perspective, and this is also of key importance to many of our partners. Hence, I was delighted to see so many dissertations this year focusing on concepts such as gender equality and empowerment and social impacts, and others included social issues as they relate to the effects of climate change, in, for example, different technologies. I also appreciated the strong policy focus in many research outputs, where you developed ideas on how governments and others can incorporate social and especially gender perspectives when they address climate change. So well done to all of you. You've performed exceptionally well, given the difficult circumstances brought about by COVID and also the lack of face-to-face meetings. So congratulations to all of you. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Talent Fundera, and my MScCCAFS research project focused on identifying entrepreneurship pathways and developing an entrepreneurship scaling framework for the scaling of legume-based agroecological intensification of maize and cassava cropping systems in Tanzania, Malawi, and Zambia and Ethiopia. I would like to acknowledge the research support that I got from Professor Charles Pillen, Dr. Peter McKeon, and Mr. Brandon Allen. I would also like to acknowledge the Irish Aid scholarship that enabled my study to be successful.
Good afternoon and welcome everybody. My name is Talent Fundera. I'll be taking you through my MScCCAFS research project entitled Entrepreneurship Pathways for Scaling Legume-Based Agroecological Intensification of Maize and Cassava Cropping System in Tanzania, Malawi, Zambia, and Ethiopia. This research project will follow this outline. It will set off by introduction, followed by research methodology, research findings, conclusions, and acknowledgement. This research project was conducted within a broader Legumes for Development project, which is being led by NUIG, Ryan Institute, and being funded by European Union and partnered with organizations as shown on the slide. Today's agriculture faces many challenges, including ensuring food security, food nutrition, powering economic development, enhancing environmental outcomes, and ensuring profitability, among other challenges. This is against the backdrop of climate change, rising affluence, increasing food demands due to population growth, among other factors as well. Agroecology presents many opportunities for meeting these objectives, and legume-based agroecological practices, they offer many benefits as shown on the slides, but these benefits are not fully realized in the focus countries for this research. And on the other hand, entrepreneurship is very important in legume-based cropping system intensification, as it spurs innovation along the value chains, and also legume-based products, innovation and services and so forth. It creates demand and supply conditions that can scale agroecological intensification, and it also reduces poverty and ensure economic development. This project aimed to answer 3 research objectives. Firstly, to identify pathways for scaling up legume-based entrepreneurship. Secondly, to develop a framework for scaling up legume-based entrepreneurship, and to identify constraints for legume-based entrepreneurship scaling. This research followed the methodology as shown here. It was a desk review and a synthesis from peer-reviewed literature and grey literature. The methodology bridged 3 approaches, namely entrepreneurship ecosystems approach, innovation systems approach, and market system development approach to synthesize entrepreneurship pathways and develop an entrepreneurship scaling framework and identifying constraints, looking at what worked and what didn't work, and what works and what doesn't work from the literature. The research identified 5 entrepreneurship pathways and highlighted one. The first one is shown here, contract farming. Fig 1 shows key elements of this pathway, including farmer capacity development and assets building, high yielding inputs, crop insurance, and third-party certification, and possible buyer routes, including aggregator, showing opportunities for creating multi-stakeholder aggregators and creating new value-adding enterprises and creating new farmers associations. These are specifically for legume-based entrepreneurship scaling. Here it is shown that contract farming is very important as it develops assets base for farmers, which is a precondition for increasing productivity. It also develops business skills and ensure consistent supply of raw materials, which is very important downstream to processors and manufacturers, which will need an guaranteed supply of raw materials. And however, the pathway requires that economically viable legumes value chains be identified, and institutional measures for reducing agent costs like side selling and contract breaching be put in place, and also for risky hedging. The second pathway here shown in Fig 2, the leasing business model, is important in ensuring agricultural productivity increase in the route to market development. Basically, a leasing business model may lease production equipment or distribution equipment. Basically, maybe distribution equipment like trucks and so forth, production equipment like tractors, and other equipment and other machinery which is used in farming. This offers opportunities for scaling production of legume-based cropping system. Basically, the model requires to have a flexible and innovative financing terms from the creditor, and having agreement with the vendors with favorable terms for buying back and maintenance and so forth, and leasing the machinery or equipment at a fee to the farmer. And the key enablers for this will require that the terms be negotiated and accountability and safeguards measures be put in place for ensure tracking of machinery, use of tracking of all the equipment and so forth to ensure accountability and responsibility of use, and also affordable pricing model for the farmer. It also, so for this model to work, it requires bankable projects or business models that can secure fundings. And the model highlights the importance of blended financing or public-private partnerships in securing the finance for buying the machinery and the equipment and so forth for the business model to work. The third entrepreneurship pathway shows that public-private partnerships can be employed to support or establish value-adding enterprises. Here, key success factors, as shown by in Fig 3, includes developing strong raw material supply chain, and as shown or as highlighted before, contract farming can be very important to develop a strong raw material supply chain. Also, long-term credit or patient credit, which is de-risked, is required for meeting the sunk costs and operational costs for this legume processing enterprise. Market development, high quality off-takers are required. Promotion, high quality promotion is also required, and responsible governance amongst the parties, and especially key is the government. Here, it is also shown that backward value chain development activities are key in terms of capacity development, especially for aflatoxin management and post-harvest grain management technologies, as well as enhancing input access for enhancing or for increasing productivity. Here, a case of Africa Improved Foods is highlighted, which is a triple P of Royal DSM, CDC Group, UK FMO Entrepreneurial Development Bank, Clinton Health Access Initiative, and World Food Programme, and the Rwandan government. The factors which are shown in this in Figure 3 have been demonstrated in the African Improved Foods case, that they are very, very important if the case of triple P in establishing legume processing enterprising is to be successful. The fourth pathway shows that an applied inclusive private equity model can be used to scale high potential legumes based startups and SMEs. Here, in a formal private equity model, venture capitalists usually target high-performing or high-potential entrepreneurs or startups, which they then invest in. They mentor, they give skills, they coach, they train, they provide resources, they provide networks and so forth, which is very important for the survival of these startups. And then they grow into big companies. And then after a period of 7 to 10 years around it, and then they exit the company. So this model can be used to scale up legume-based entrepreneurship, specifically using 3 ways, like firstly, using agribusiness incubators and agribusiness accelerators, or direct targeting of corporate venture capital, pooling or direct engaging of private sector, as shown in Fig 4 here. And the key driving factors include capacity development, mentoring, and coaching for the success of this agribusiness and and accelerators. And for the success of direct private sector engagement, trust and strong relationships are required to engage and pull in the private sector into investment, for them to invest into these legion-based startups and SMEs. So this provides opportunity for youth and women empowerment, as the pathway recognized that a special eye should be focused on youth and the women through capacity development and offering them opportunities which they can become skilled in entrepreneurship management. The fifth pathway identified that efforts to scale entrepreneurship requires both market development and production support. Here, the entrepreneurship pathway number 5 focuses on ensuring agriculture productivity or scaling agriculture productivity through entrepreneurship, through supporting existing seed systems or developing new seed systems. And here the main entry point has been noted that a 12-year tropical legumes project that ended in 2019, there are many key learnings there. And leverage points include seed hubs, agro dealers, network development, linking funding, community-based seed producers, private seed companies and research institutions, supporting communal seed entrepreneurs, and capacity development, and also private partnership for established seed entrepreneurs. All these are opportunities for entrepreneurship in terms of seed system development and establishing seeds and enterprises. Here, the pathway for value chain programming for legume exports is highlighted. And this pathway has been noted that it is key for forex inflow and rural development and aggregate welfare increase. It provides opportunities for high value crops, especially in the African continental free trade area, and countries here are recommended to leverage on their core competencies in terms of specific legumes which they are good at producing. And governments will need legume stimulating policies and value adding enterprises that ensure that exported legumes are value added, not just raw legumes. The framework for scaling legume-based entrepreneurship in the focus countries is here shown in Fig 5. This framework was developed from literature, as explained earlier, and it shows that a shared vision is the most key starting point, which informs all other activities like legume sector scanning, which identifies tipping points for transformative market system development. It is also shown here that multi-stakeholder innovation platforms are the key steering institution. They represent an institutional innovation which is very, very important in scaling up legumes. And other activities like monitoring, valuation, learning, and co-evolution, they are very important, which makes the framework developed flexible and dynamic. Here, enabling factors which are key are highlighted, which includes governance and leadership, including transformational leadership, visionary leadership, and tipping point leadership. However, the elements of all this framework here they are not tested, and they will need, the elements causal relationships will need further testing in the future research. Constraints to legume-based entrepreneurship have been noted that they are both production and market-sided. And production-related factors include poor and low inputs usage, pests and diseases, poor access to credit, and poor assets base, which constrains increasing productivity or increasing production of legumes. Inadequate seed systems, which lacks robustness, poor harvest technologies as well. And market factors which have been noted include unreliable market, volatile legume prices, low farm gate prices, high transport costs due to poor infrastructure, poor market and trade linkages, underdeveloped agriculture incubation and acceleration systems which will need attention, lack of legumes stimulating policies and financial capital, and lack of entrepreneurial skills for small-scale businesses. In conclusion, 5 pathways in the scaling framework were synthesized and constraints identified. The framework elements causal relationship, as noted earlier, will need further testing and future research. And future work on seed systems and entrepreneurship must leverage on learnings from tropical legend project, and policy actions must target incentivizing mainstreaming legumes in agriculture investment plans and creating an enabling environment. And deliberate efforts are needed to target and develop agribusiness incubation and acceleration systems for agripreneur support in the region. And lastly, continual capacity development, partnership for innovative financing, strong systems, and agriculture mechanization have been noted to have significant potential for increasing productivity and supporting market development system and entrepreneurship in the region, which therefore will mean that they will need to be supported, and policies to support these and partnerships will be needed. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge the guidance and research support that I got from Professor Charles Pillen, Dr. Peter C. McKeon, Mr. Brendan Allen, and I would also like to acknowledge the support from Irish Aid, basically from the Government of Ireland, Department of Foreign Affairs, which made my studying at NUI possible. Thank you, and thank you for listening to my presentation.
Hi, my name is Park Lynn. My project was based on generating a review publication entitled Measurement of Greenhouse Gas Emissions from Ruminant Livestock, State of the Art and Future Perspectives. Livestock are major contributors to global greenhouse gas emissions. They account for approximately 14.5% of total anthropogenic emissions. Methane is one of the main greenhouse gas emissions from ruminant livestock. This is why my thesis focused primarily on the measuring of CH4 from ruminants. Methane has a high global warming potential, as it is 28 times higher than CO2. Hence, ruminant livestock are under major scrutiny at present. The research goal for this project was to generate a review publication targeted to frontiers in sustainable food systems. I examined all literature available, looking at the various techniques used for measuring greenhouse gas emissions from ruminant livestock. I also looked at emerging technologies and any data gaps which are hindering the measurement of emissions from ruminant livestock. My findings from the review suggest that respiration chambers are currently considered the best technique, especially in terms of accuracy of measurements. I found many emerging technologies to be very useful at measuring emissions. Handheld lasers and open path lasers were found to be especially effective. Life cycle assessments were found to be a very useful way of generating a product-oriented assessment, which takes both direct and indirect emissions from ruminant livestock systems into consideration. All techniques for measuring greenhouse gas emissions from ruminant livestock have their advantages and disadvantages. The accuracy, feasibility, and availability of these techniques must be improved going forward. Policy adaptations must ensure there are less data gaps uncovered when, for example, trying to model emissions. I would especially like to thank my NUI supervisors, Professor Charles Spillane, Dr. Peter McKeon, and Dr. Galina Priskova. I would also like to thank my Teagasc supervisor, Sinead Waters, and Dr. David Stiles for their contribution also.
Good afternoon. I hope everyone is having a good day. My name is August Gintner, and I am from the state of Wisconsin within the United States. So my research project was on the impacts of CSV analysis of the global impact of climate smart villages on climate resilience, food security, and adaptive capacity. So to jump in, my research objectives. The objective of the research was to review all the existing literature on climate smart villages to determine the global impacts that CSVs have on climate resilience, food security, and adaptive capacity. So climate resilience, food security, and adaptive capacity are three central goals of all CCAFS work, and specifically in climate smart villages. It's important to note here that climate resilience and adaptive capacity are very similar components and are often written on in conjunction within the research. However, climate resilience is essentially how successful the adaptation strategies are, and adaptive capacity is how likely farmers are to implement specific strategies. So increasing farmers the tools, strategies that they have at their disposal to implement in their systems. So a little bit of background on climate smart villages. Climate smart villages were developed in 2011 by CCAFS, so about a decade old, with the goal of increasing climate resilience for communities, agricultural communities, and smallholder farmers. CSVs use a wide range of adaptation strategies to achieve their goals, and so this is done through partnerships between communities, the villages themselves, organizations, whether internal or external, non-governmental organizations, this type of thing, the private sector, legislative bodies, and educational institutions. So the goal being that bringing together all these different entities is able to provide both internal and external knowledge and research to provide a community with, enable farmers in a community to implement specific strategies that are tailored to each CSV, whether it's based on their climate, their demographic, their soil types, this sort of thing. So CSVs have been implemented across South and Southeast Asia, East and West Africa, and Latin America. So in 2011, when CSVs were first implemented, less than 20 were implemented globally, and since then that number has exploded to more than 1,000 CSVs globally. However, CCAFS is only responsible for currently monitoring 35 of the CSVs globally. So getting into the research methods that I use, a systemic literature review was conducted, and the search string climate smart village or climate resilient village, seen there in bullet point 2, that search string was used across 4 databases, databases being Scopus, Web of Science, Google Scholar, and CGSpace. Scopus, Web of Science, and Google Scholar are all commonly used scientific databases, while CGSpace is the CGIAR CCAFS catalog of publications, so specific to CCAFS work. The search string used was a rather generic search string to try and accumulate as much literature as possible that exists on the topic. So how the process went, the search string was entered into the 4 databases, and a review of titles of publications based on the search results. Papers were downloaded if there was any mention of climate smart village, climate smart agriculture, as well as a combination of climate change or agriculture. So this resulted in 192 papers being downloaded initially. 13 papers were then removed for being duplicates, leaving 179 papers to be screened. The screening process involved a review of the paper's title as well as an analysis of the abstract. And so then 105 papers were removed during the screening process, identified as being unrelated to CSV. So to pass the screening process, papers had to include a discussion of climate smart villages in some capacity. So the papers on climate smart agriculture, those were weeded out, leaving 73 papers eligible for the final data set. However, a second screening process was conducted to include only papers with primary data, primary research, to be included in the final data set. So this left 41 papers that used surveys, analysis, any qualitative methods using primary data. So the 41 papers included in the data set were broken down based on the focus of the study. So this bar graph shows all 41 papers. Climate resilience and adaptive capacity was the most prominent research focus, with just under 25% of all publications in the data set focusing on this area of research, and crop production, food security being the second most prominent research focus, with just 2 fewer papers there. And so no surprise that these 2 areas of focus were the most common, as they are the overarching central goals of CSV and CCAFS work in general. So then some takeaways, and this is the challenges in assessing global impacts of CSV. So as the objectives of the paper stated, drawing global conclusions on CSVs was the objective of the research. However, the literature states that this is extremely challenging for a few reasons. One being the multitude of adaptation strategies used in CSVs. CSVs, no 2 are the same, as they are tailored to a specific community and involve using different strategies, as well as even the same strategies in different capacities. So the unique characteristics of each CSV make comparing them, apples to apples, very challenging. Another thing is the inconsistencies in agricultural production systems. So comparing a dry land agricultural system to a tropical system is once again not apples to apples because of the differences in crops grown or even soils, climates, that type of thing. Climate variations, just mentioned that. It's hard to compare CSVs in two different climates because the strategies they use will be very different as well as the potential outcomes. And then finally, the inability to quantify some components of CSVs. For example, gender equality is one that the literature really struggles to quantify the gender equality, whether CSVs, certain strategies are successful in increasing gender equality, but to what exact extent is tough to quantify, tough to evaluate. So some more takeaways: measuring of individual CSV components. The literature states this is a much better indicator of the impact of CSVs. So a few specific components that were seen to be very successful, having profound impacts across the literature. Resource conservation and specifically water management is a major one. The literature states that this is an area in which CSVs have a major impact on improving climate resilience. This involves creating watersheds, collecting rainwater, land use planning, increasing soil water capacity, and as well as developing efficient irrigation systems, increasing farmers' access to water. And in CSVs compared to non-CSVs, there was a 200% increase in the water that was available to farmers, which is extremely important for drought conditions or climate change impacts. So food security, this one is easier to quantify, and it is seen that CSVs have an impact on production outputs, leading to increased food security and overall outputs. So this is done through diversifying crops that are grown, using drought-tolerant seeds, as well as the water management, irrigation, stuff like that. And then adaptive capacity, climate information systems is one that has a significant impact on farmers. So farmers that have access to climate information services are twice as likely to implement adaptation strategies. So these services include crop modeling, climate modeling, weather forecasting, basically driving decision making for farmers. So some conclusions, as mentioned before, literature and research gaps. There's a need for continued CSV research, both regionally and globally. When looking at the pie chart here shows a breakdown of the 41 publications used in this research based on region. You can see that there is a handful of papers for each region, but this is not enough evidence not enough literature to create significant evidence on the impact of CSVs. And so more research is needed to drive scaling, as well as evidence of which components of CSVs are the most successful so that these can be scaled out. And then second conclusion, this is closely tied to literature and research gaps, and that's the need for policy mainstreaming. So CSV implementation requires resources and financial backing, so policy is required here to drive these needs for implementation, as well as provides a space to bring together those organizations and the community to create that conglomerate of information and knowledge that is needed to create successful adaptation strategies. And then, yeah, as mentioned above, the need for policy as well to scale CSVs, driving scaling is a major need, a critical component of all CCAFS work that is successful, and especially in CSVs. And the reason being that the projections of climate impacts over the next decade suggest that there's a need for major agricultural adaptations across all systems and regions. So policy to drive scaling to keep up with the rate that climate change impacts will be occurring is critical for CSVs. And finally, a few acknowledgements. I'd like to acknowledge the National University of Ireland and the Ryan Institute for providing the course and then the research as well, and then CIMMYT in India, the Maize and Wheat Improvement Center as a host organization, and Supervisor Pramod Agarwal there for his help. And then finally, my NUI Galway supervisors, Peter McKeon and Charles Spillane, for their help throughout the course, and then as well as the research as well. So thank you, that's all from me. Hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Dear CCAFS students, as a new graduates who will start to look for the job, you may think that you have a dilemma in front of you. You need experience to get a job, but a job to get an experience. So what can you do? Actually, the transferable skills that you gain during your MScCCAFS program are crucial to show your experience and attributes. Your transferable skills will help you to stand out from the crowd when applying for a job. Therefore, it is very important to understand and highlight your transferable skills that you gained during your one-year master degree training in NUI Galway. And do not forget to explain in your CV and give some details of when and how you used your transferable skills during your research project. Good luck with the job application and your future scientific career.
Good afternoon. My name is Francesca Cugino, and my thesis project for the MScCCAFS 2021 annual conference focuses on the question, should donors invest in agroecology for climate change adaptation and mitigation? A general definition of agroecology is the application of ecological principles to agricultural systems. This practice is associated with preventing yield loss, protecting soil, reducing inputs, preserving biodiversity, and maintaining the agroecological landscape. It is important to define the scope of what practices and system changes were deemed agroecological in accordance with the Rapid Evidence Review. Agroecology is defined in this review by FAO's 10 elements, which include diversity, synergies, efficiency, resilience, recycling, co-creation and sharing of knowledge, human and social values, culture and food traditions, responsible governance, and circular and solidary economy. These all help to operationalize agroecology. Gleisman's 5 levels were also used to define agroecology in the study. Level 1 is defined as increasing the efficiency of industrial and conventional practices in order to reduce the use and consumption of costly, scarce, and environmentally damaging inputs. Level 2 is defined as substituting alternative practices for industrial or conventional inputs and practices. Level 3 is to redesign the agroecosystem so that it functions on the basis of a new set of ecological processes. Level 4, reestablish a more direct connection between those who grow food and those who consume it. And level 5, to build a new global food system based on equity, participation, democracy, and justice that is not only sustainable, but helps to restore and protect Earth's life support systems upon which we all depend. Agroecological transitions are imperative to understanding the cost-effectiveness of agroecological practices. Transitions are important as differing levels of input, ranging from incremental change, such as intercropping, to entire system change, such as integrated soil fertility management and integrated pest and disease management, result in differing outputs. Of the 58 articles, 24 countries were examined with a range of agroecological inputs and resulting productivity outputs. A schematic scale was created to measure output as percent change in accordance to level of inputs. The research methodologies for this thesis project included a systematic literature review, data disaggregation and meta-analysis, creation of scales compared to a baseline, examination of yield data, and examination of profitability data. For the systematic literature review, the Agroecology and Climate Change Rapid Evidence Review, along with the initial 138 articles from the data set, were read in full, followed by an analysis of the 58 articles containing economic data and a creation of a comprehensive table of reported yield and economic data. For the examination of yield data, percent change for agroecological yield and the averages in this percent change were calculated, along with the change in actual yield measured as tons per hectare and kilograms per hectare. Two standard deviation graphs were created. For fields using intercropping, land equivalent ratios and protein and nutrient yield were examined. Under the examination of profitability data, percent return on investment was calculated along with the average percent return on investment. A table was created that included gross profit and gross variable costs for conventional baselines and agroecological practices. Benefit cost ratios, market data, and gendered income data were also examined. For 23 of the 58 articles, enough data existed to calculate percent change for agroecological yield. The equation used was agroecological yield minus conventional or control yield divided by conventional or control yield. This resulted in a mean percent increase of 58%. For 20 of the articles, agroecological yield increased, while for 7, there was agroecological loss. This depended on crop type, implementation of practice versus entire system change, and region. Following the calculation of percent agroecological yield change, actual agroecological yield change was determined and reported for 21 articles. 14 articles reported in tons per hectare, while 7 articles reported in kilogram per hectare. A majority of agroecological yields reported showed increase, while yield measured in tons per hectare showed an overall positive trend. Standard deviations and averages were calculated for both change in yield tons per hectare and change in yield kilogram per hectare. Probability distribution was calculated, and the two graphs below were created. Return on investment and benefit cost ratios demonstrate that support should be given to smallholders to invest in agroecology. Benefit cost ratios by practice were reported across 7 different articles, where semi-perennial rotation had the highest benefit cost ratio, and high input organic agriculture at the local market had the lowest benefit cost ratio. It is important to measure these transitions and to compare entire system change versus incremental change. Percent return on investment from the application of agroecological practices was measured in 15 articles. Among these articles, the average percent return on investment for agroecological practices was 97.8%. It is important to note that a majority of the 15 articles had positive yield data. However, only 15 of the 58 articles contained enough reported data to calculate percent return on investment. The main findings from this thesis project include that a majority of percent yield change for agroecology was positive. However, there were existing outliers. That return on investment, benefit cost ratios, and income data demonstrate that in most cases, agroecology is lucrative for smallholder farmers. This is dependent on crop and livestock type, region, and agroecological practice. Benefits outweigh the higher input costs for system changes, while in some cases, agroecological input avails lower costs and higher return on investment. Cost effectiveness levels vary between different agroecological practices, with semi-perennial rotation proving to have the greatest benefit cost ratio, while organic agriculture had the lowest. It is important to note that organic agriculture was reported at the local level. Market data shows that organic agriculture does better at regional levels. This is why it is important for future research to focus on market data for the cost effectiveness of different agroecological practices. From the findings of this thesis, several recommendations can be made for smallholder farmers and investors, and for researchers. For smallholder farmers and investors, it is important to consider entire system change when switching to agroecology, as it provides the greatest return on investment. It is important to consider intercropping of more than one staple crop to increase net yield, protein yield, nutrient yield, and nutrition security when compared to monoculture fields. It is important to consider low input cost agroecology where it is difficult to secure funding, as it still provides positive return on investment, yield gain, and has less adverse environmental impacts than conventional agriculture. It is important to consider expanding to regional markets for greater return on investment. For researchers, it is important that economic data be reported in local currency in addition to a major standard currency. This will be beneficial when trying to compare several different incomes reported at different levels of local currencies. Researchers should note the date of the economic data reported to aid researchers in comparing different economic data with the ability to account for variable exchange rate. Researchers should take into account the inflation rates of each year and report not only nominal income but also real income, accounting for inflation. Consumer price indexes, farm gate prices, and other market data should be reported for each year. Land equivalent ratios and nutritional yield also should be reported, particularly for different intercropping scenarios. In the dataset, only 3 of the 8 articles containing intercropping scenarios report land equivalent ratios. I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Charles Spillane, Dr. Peter McKeon, Dr. Lenny Wollenberg, Kyle Dittmer, and CIAT for their support throughout this thesis process. I am also grateful to CIAT for funding opportunities.
I wrote a research article following the World Development Journal author guidelines. My review focused on the concept of leaving no one behind and reaching the most marginalized groups of people around the world through participatory research methodologies. I worked through the concept of marginalization, who these people are, and looked at photo voice and the potential of ArcGIS story maps to supplement such research in a positive manner going forward. So the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals Agenda to 2030 is underpinned by the ethos of leaving no one behind. This slogan ties in with the ultimate target of the SDGs, which is to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure prosperity for all. The UN member states pledge to elevate the living standards of all the planet's people irrespective of sex, age, disability, ethnicity, race, religion, class, and place of origin, among other factors. The Leave No One Behind slogan is ubiquitous in the international development context. The concept of reaching the furthest behind first will remain another hollow call to arms if global affirmative action is not taken. So those furthest behind can be considered to live on the edges of society and may therefore be considered marginalized. It has been defined as the existence of an individual group or population either on the periphery of mainstream society or between two distinct cultures while belonging to neither. Marginalised populations are prone to experiencing healthcare deficiencies and inferior health outcomes, sexual discrimination, persecution and violence, limited employment opportunities, and myriad other injustices, putting a severe constraint on their freedoms and subduing their voices. Marginalisation occurs due to a variety of factors, among them extreme poverty and misguided cultural mythos, an example being people born with albinism in certain parts of Africa. The concept of intersectionality, developed by Kimberly Crenshaw, describes how many people are marginalised in more than one way. These people are said to have multiple social demographic variables that inhibit their acceptance in society. So, people and groups of people live in society's edges for multiple reasons, as talked about earlier. My research article focused on members of the LGBT plus community, disability, post-conflict and albinism specifically, and ethnicity, with a focus on the Rohingya and Uyghur people in Myanmar and China respectively. So looking at the LGBT plus community, police persecution, religious and political oppression, the HIV pandemic and LGBT plus stigma contribute toward the resultant problems. These can include substance abuse, depression and suicidality. Their marginalisation is embodied by the intertwining processes of reduced access to opportunities, power inequities, devaluation and social exclusion. Stigma manifests itself in the form of familial rejection, physical violence and widespread global illegality. There can be a prevalence too of syndemic conditions where multiple health concerns affect people concurrently. COVID-19 compounds these worries currently. An example would include concern over HIV risk compounded by resultant depression and the risk of substance abuse. In Vietnam, same-sex marriage is neither recognised nor prohibited. This lack of recognition or misrecognition deprives the LGBT plus community there of societal acceptance and inclusion. So looking at disability and albinism specifically, institutional, attitudinal and physical barriers are factors that contribute to the widespread exclusion of persons with disabilities from communities globally. This societal conditioning impacts childhood education, vocational training and healthcare, which can lead to extreme poverty, illiteracy and unfulfilled basic health needs, driving people to the margins of society. 80% of the world's disabled population live in low and middle income countries. The SDG goal of leaving no one behind is undermined by this, with no significant efforts in place to alter it. So persons with albinism suffer bullying, exclusion, mutilation, sometimes death at the hands of their abusers. It's recessively inherited, non-contagious condition that leads to reduced pigmentation in the hair, skin and eyes. It can lead to increased sensitivity to the sun, visual impairment. These are symptoms that can normally be managed. In their case, the label disabled can be considered disempowering, and justifiable questioning exists as to whether it's accurate. Unfortunately, misinformation, deeply entrenched social prejudices and misguided superstitions regularly lead to catastrophic consequences for people born with the genetic disorder. In Europe and the US, people with albinism are often viewed suspiciously. Children with albinism are bullied routinely, and common depictions of people with albinism in popular cultures that they're somehow threatening or fair targets for ridicule. Such views drive people with albinism to the margins. Superstitions and myths have clouded reasonable perceptions of the condition in parts of Africa. It can be considered a curse from God and contagious. Some people believe that having sex with a woman with albinism will cure AIDS and infertility, while the body parts of those with albinism are often used in witchcraft due to their perceived magical properties. In Tanzania, the majority live on the margins of society and are at risk of extreme poverty. These cultural injustices are compounded by their visual impairment and inability to engage in most agrarian tasks due to their sensitivity to the sun. So unfortunately, we can't openly engage with many of the most marginalised groups. Their ostracism comes with the threat of violence and incarceration in some cases. Participatory research methodologies must respect these challenges. Free, prior and informed consent is essential prior to any participation and publishing of materials. Most organisations have policy established in this regard. You must look at the ethics of acquiring consent when working with some people with cognitive disabilities and dementia too. Trust is essential, and participants must feel safe and respected. Governmental sensitivities are a major barrier, especially in post-conflict regions. In addition to this, participants may be traumatized, so emotional access is noted as a major barrier. Participatory action research methodologies promote self-advocacy, where the researcher takes the role of facilitator. They developed as a countermeasure to traditional top-down models of development research. Their bottom-up approach involves traditionally marginalised local actors and indigenous or local knowledge. Participatory GIS then brings together key actors across different levels of society to bring about positive change while working towards a common goal. It involves ground mapping, participatory sketch mapping, and aerial photography. It empowers the actors involved and helps elucidate local spatial knowledge, thus embodying the core principles of participatory research. So the photo voice technique sees community members entrusted with cameras that allow them to record the reality of their lifestyles, with the resulting material used as a catalyst for beneficial change. Photo voice can also improve engagement within communities, help develop research partners' self-efficacy, and enhance awareness of a community's resources. It's a flexible and adaptive program that transcends scientific disciplines and has been used successfully in disability studies, post-conflict regions, and among the LGBT+ community. This case study with the photo involved looks at the use of photo voice in post-conflict Uganda. The focus of the study, the participants are women who were among 20,000 abducted and trafficked over the course of the conflict in the 1980s. The participants are given cameras and encouraged to document key aspects of their life on the margins, the people and things that are important to them, and speak a little about their experiences where they're comfortable doing so. This research learned that the women essentially developed a new social contract among themselves to survive. So ArcGIS Story Maps was launched in 2010 by the Environmental Systems Research Institute. Weaving multimedia content with maps, they sought to create an interactive digital storytelling tool that would benefit research and learning globally. Maps have always been an effective tool for disseminating spatial stories due to their visually stimulative design potential and the fact that they can cross linguistic and cultural barriers. Story maps, they're kind of similar to WordPress and Squarespace in that they're drag and drop website builders essentially. The user can plug in their own maps, videos, photos, slideshows, audio and text to construct an impactful digital story. They're beginning to gain a foothold in the science community with USAID and Doctors Without Borders examples of organizations using them. Story maps can be used as a vehicle for conceptualizing complex data sets through the rendering and publication of 3D maps, mimicking the research area, creating an immersive experience for those that interact with it. Additionally, users can create their own path through the data, leading to more personal interpretations and breaking from sequential storytelling, which marries well with the nature of many photo voice studies. The technical know-how of the participants is an obvious drawback when trying to incorporate story maps into participatory research settings. Studies have shown that getting in an expert to facilitate part of the workshop is a benefit and can help overcome this hurdle. Similarly, access to internet and devices capable of hosting the software is an issue. Story maps have been promoted by researchers as having the potential to host e-learning modules. These can be targeted towards a particular audience, for example, policymakers. Self-monitoring tests, can be developed and published at the end of the story to help consolidate the material within them. So, some of the conclusions from the research. Unpacking the conceptual slogan of "Leave no one behind" was difficult. Identification of the farthest behind is an inexact science due to the scale of global discrimination and poverty. The "Leave no one behind" mantra is a noble target, but will remain just that if global efforts to pull people back from the margins do not escalate from this point onward. Many of the groups focused on within this research article are in direful positions. They may have been cut off from society through malignant practices, and our ability to, reach these groups is severely limited by jurisdiction. What we can do, though, is work on finding the most impactful methodologies by which to tell their stories. We must be mindful of the risk involved in doing this, and the preservation of their safety and well-being must be paramount in any proposed research project. The idea of participatory research by proxy may have some value, but additional research will be required before any conclusions can be drawn for certain. Where photo voice is concerned, the biggest risk involved is the potential for unintended consequences upon publication of photographs taken during the research. Both the participants and the facilitators need to be mindful of what gets published. Consent and respect for local traditions and laws are critical. A good idea would be to screen the final shortlist of photos. It might be possible to enlist the help of a local policymaker or actor with an in-depth knowledge of local customs, scan through the data and mark out any that should not be published. And ArcGIS story maps and participatory GIS can augment participatory methodologies such as photo voice, but they probably work best if used in tandem with the existing techniques. The story maps platform can be used to extend the reach of information and data gathered through photo voice workshops and add substance to the documentary photography and personal assessments of the participants. When story maps are to be used, it will always be of benefit to the ultimate research output if an expert is brought in to oversee at least some of the work. These are of major concern to the prospects of the platform being used in a widespread manner for participatory research in poor and inaccessible regions of the world. Again, I see a value in a proxy style of research whereby an outside actor, probably a GIS specialist, gathers data collected in the field and develops an impactful story map that effectively tells the story of the participants involved with consent and risk noted first. And lastly, the intrinsic value of story maps lies in its ability to host a variety of media types. It allows for the embedding of audio, which can be used to dictate the story to persons with vision impairments, as well as increasing the accessibility of the content by embedding audio descriptions in different languages. Geospatial data offers the potential for well-rounded interactive content that provides a robust picture of the data involved. Video content can complement these features, creating a resource that can appeal to a variety of audiences. The value of story maps and participatory research is definitely worth pursuing.
Hi everyone, my name is Sharon Inone and I am from the Solomon Islands. I am a student of the MScCCAFS program at NUIG of the class 2020 to 2021. My research project is Climate Smart Agriculture in the Solomon Islands, and my partner organization is International Center for Tropical Agriculture, or CIAT for short. Now stay with me as I take you through some very interesting findings in the research. Thank you. Before we proceed, what is climate smart agriculture? Climate smart agriculture is an integrated approach to managing landscapes, cropland, livestock, forest, and fisheries that address the interlinked challenges of food security and climate change. Climate Smart Agriculture, or CSA's foundational basis, lies with its three main objectives. Firstly, to sustainably increase agricultural productivity and incomes. Secondly, adapting and building resilience to climate change. And lastly, reducing or removing greenhouse gas emissions where possible. This is an image of a 6-year-old little girl from the Solomon Islands. Her name is Charlotte Sretavada, or CSV for short, as in Climate Smart Village. And interestingly, she is also very fascinated and interested in advocating for climate smart agriculture, CSA, or climate smart villages, CSV, in the Solomon Islands. I am bringing this image up because gender mainstreaming, information dissemination, and raising our youths and kids to acknowledge that agriculture is the most helpful, most useful, and the most noble employment of man is indeed a vital step towards the success of CSA in the Solomon Islands or in any country for that matter. Now, let me give you a brief background of the Solomon Islands. Solomon Islands is an archipelagic nation consisting of more than 1,000 islands covering 28,400 square kilometers with a population of just over 500,000. The foundation of Solomon Islands economy is attributed to three main agricultural sources, which is forestry, fisheries, and agriculture. Collectively, these three sectors make up 40% of the GDP, of which agriculture is estimated to contribute 29% from that 40%. This implies that agriculture is the most vital sector in the Solomon Islands, providing and sustaining for 85% of the rural population. So what are the project objectives for this research on the topic climate smart agriculture in the Solomon Islands? Firstly, is to identify the key agricultural production systems in the Solomon Islands, the CSA practices associated with those systems, the climate smartness level of those practices, the obstacles to CSA adoption, and the potential point of entry for scaling up CSA in the Solomon Islands. And secondly, to generate an entry in the CCAFS CSA country profile publication series relevant for the Solomon Islands. The methodology for this research project are outlined as follows. Step 1. There was a literature review through which the CSA practices of the Solomon Islands agricultural production systems were identified. Step 2. Agricultural experts from the Solomon Islands were contacted virtually for validation of those established or identified CSA practices. Step 3. A questionnaire was compiled on the various production systems, the CSA practices, adoption rate, their mitigation, adaptation and productivity capabilities, challenges, climate smartness assessment, and disaster risk assessment. These questionnaires were then sent via email to agriculturalists in the Solomon Islands for their input. They then responded, and those information were collected, assessed, and presented. Lastly, a case study was also done virtually on improved Temotu traditional agriculture, or ITA for short, and the use of breadfruit for CSA in the Solomon Islands, with a small village in Temotu province of the Solomon Islands also virtually. The research findings established that the key top 11 agricultural production systems in the Solomon Islands include 1. Coconut, secondly oil palm, thirdly cocoa, sweet potatoes, yams, taro, fruits, pigs, rice paddy, vegetables, and chicken. Of the top 11 agricultural production systems in the Solomon Islands, 32 CSA practices were identified in relation to each of those production systems. As you can see in this figure here, the climate smartness score for each of those systems is quite high and medium, with a few that has a low score. For instance, coconut. Coconut has 3 CSA practices, which is coconut intercropping with cocoa, agroforestry, and the CRB management. And these 3 have a medium climate smartness score. Let's move on to the fruits production systems. These are 3 CSA practices as well. The improved Temotu traditional agriculture, or ITA for short, agroforestry, and home gardens. These 3 CSA practices score, the first 2 score a high smartness level, and the last one has a medium climate smartness score. This is an indication that those CSA or climate-smart agriculture is a new concept in the Solomon Islands when it comes to policies and awareness. CSA is an established traditional concept with smallholder farmers in the Solomon Islands. One of the CSA practices that stood out in the research is the improved Temoto traditional agriculture, or ITA for short. ITA is an agroforestry system, and it is an enhancement of existing traditional practices. And in the Solomon Islands, it is practiced in the eastern part of that country called Temoto, hence the name. It is a multiple cropping farming system that is intensive and can cultivate up to 23 varieties of plants on the farm. ITA is a low-cost with high output system. It is a tree-based multi-story agroforestry system with shade-tolerant plants planted under taller trees and traditional root crops and vines planted at the lowest level. ITA is self-sustaining and doesn't require the application of fertilizers. It is permanent and fixed on the same spot every year. ITA imitates the natural environment, though in the case all the plants and fruits and crops are planted are for food and economic security. ITA maintains conducive conditions within the system, and farmers decide which root crops suit at various times of the year. The use of legumes also provides natural nitrogen-rich fertilizer. ITA encourages mulching from dead leaves and organic matter. Additionally, due to diversity within ITA, the farm is usually resistant to insects, pests, and plant diseases. One of the products of ITA is Nambo. As you can see in this picture, these are Nambo. It's a cracker that people from the Temoto province usually use for food security during disasters, and it has been a method passed on from the past generations to the now generation. And this Nambo is a product of breadfruit, and breadfruit is usually one of the tree crops farmed in that ITA system. So breadfruit is a very, very good CSA crop, that a tree that helps with climate adaptation, mitigation, and also food security. Challenges for CSA in the Solomon Islands. One of the most notable challenges is the absence of an agriculture, science, and research institution. This consequently resulted in the lack of data in several areas of agriculture and food security. When there's lack of data, information flow to decision makers, planners, and leaders is limited. Hence, the reflection of workable solutions through laws and policies is therefore affected as well. Secondly, there's weak institutional frameworks and policies that are only operational at the national level and are failing to be replicated at the provincial extension services and rural areas where majority of the smallholder farmers live. Therefore, provincial agriculture extension centers remain dysfunctional due to lack of recent policies, finance, resources, and support from the national government. Farmers with issues in the rural and provincial areas usually dig deep into their traditional knowledge to counter issues such as new pests and diseases, as provincial agricultural centers do not have the solutions. Provincial agriculture centers, therefore, they lack qualified human resources, marketing capacity linkages, and information, also financial facilities, post-harvest handling and technology, and tertiary industries to boost rural agricultural productivity. Additionally, there's lack of systematic land use planning and contingency plans at both national and provincial level in terms of internal migration due to sea level rise and how it will impact agriculture and food security. Land disputes continue to pose a threat to CSA development in the Solomon Islands, especially understanding that communities are patrilineal, which implies that women have no rights to the land. So gender mainstreaming into agriculture and youth inclusivity is therefore not a priority. This is an issue because most women and youths have accepted their place in the society. Therefore, trying to bring revolution in this area by switching land rights to women will trigger men to revolt against it, as they will perceive it as an approach for disharmony. Gender mainstreaming into agriculture in the Solomon Islands will be a challenge and will require a different approach compared to other communities. To scale up CSA in the Solomon Islands, there must be effective coordination between the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock and the Ministry of Climate Change. There is still a gap in this area. With the challenges that were mentioned, in order for the success of CSA in the Solomon Islands, there has to be an empowered farming communities where farmers have knowledge of what CSA is, where national and subnational plans and policies they all work towards achieving CSA and climate smart villages. Climate information and services and insurance should be available to smallholder farmers, and that should be a priority. CSA practices and technologies and innovation should be an intervention to enhance existing traditional knowledge and practices. And local and national public and private institutions should work together for the success of CSA. To conclude, CSA in the Solomon Islands is based on existing traditional practices. There is low modern CSA technological and innovative interventions. Secondly, there is potential in improved Temotu traditional agriculture, or ITER, and the use of breadfruit for food security in the Solomon Islands and the Pacific. Breadfruit is an underutilized fruit in the Solomon Islands that has many benefits and meets the main pillars of CSA, including adaptation, mitigation, and productivity. CSA in the Solomon Islands requires overcoming current challenges and obstacles through achievable policies, institutional scaling up, financial support, awareness and training, human resource development, gender and youth inclusivity, and mainstreaming into agriculture. Lastly, and importantly, I want to acknowledge that this research would not have been possible without the assistance, guidance, and supervision from very important people that I'm going to mention now. My project supervisors, Professor Charles Spillane from NUIG, Dr. Peter McKeon, NUIG, Dr. Una Murray, Dr. Godfrey Grosjean from SIAT, Dr. Evan, and Dr. Mary. I am truly grateful for your guidance along the way. Organizations such as the IRIS Aid Fellowship for Small Island Developing States, this is the first time they're extending the scholarship to the Solomon Islands, and I am the first recipient. I am really honored, and I thank you for the scholarship. The National University of Ireland, the International Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, Live and Learn Solomon Islands, the Ministry of Agriculture Solomon Islands, the Ministry of Climate Change Solomon Islands, Sinatina Organic Farm Solomon Islands. I also want to thank my interviewees and the agricultural experts in the Solomon Islands for your responses and input though virtually you have all contributed to the success of this project. And to individuals, Novada and Jimmy Segodi from Papua New Guinea, thank you very much and God bless. Bye.
Hello, my name is Liz Coleman and I'm a lecturer here in the School of Physics and a researcher that specialises in climate and air pollution modelling in the Rhine Institute Centre for Climate and Air Pollution Studies, also in NUIG. So I would first of all like to extend a very warm welcome to the incoming master's students and say how much I'm looking forward to meeting with you all and working with you over the coming weeks and months. And I'd also like to offer my congratulations to the students that have just completed the Masters. So well done on a very impressive performance during a very challenging time. So I lecture in the science behind climate change. So during the course, we discuss how the climate has always been changing. So natural climate change, could talk about Earth system interactions, the natural greenhouse effect, but also how anthropogenic activity has impacted the climate over the past few hundred years, because it's now unequivocal that human activity since the Industrial Revolution has caused the rapid climate change that we are seeing evidence of today. So we're going to describe climate models. These are the tools that are used to synthesize our current knowledge on climate and Earth system and simulate possible scenarios into the future. We're going to discuss the strengths and limitations of these models, knowledge gaps, unknowns that exist in climate models, and crucially how to interpret climate model data and how climate model projections can be used to inform policy. So overall, I'm going to aim to deliver a sound basis into the science of climate change, imparting the necessary information, understanding, and language that is necessary to engage stakeholders across all levels, from community to international policy levels. So armed with this scientific knowledge, you'll be able to work for climate solutions from mitigation of our impact on the climate system to solutions for adaptation and resilience. So once again, good luck to both the incoming and the outgoing MSc students, and I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the symposium.
Hello everyone, my name is Sinsidali Sinino, a student from Kenya pursuing MScCCAFS program in NUIG. My paper focused on a meta-analysis of technological approaches for reducing storage post-harvest loss at a household level in Malawi. My host partner organization was ICRAF in the ERA program. So an introduction to post-harvest losses. A key global challenge for humanity is to ensure food security to an increasing population while enhancing sustainable development. Post-harvest losses are a major threat to the sustainability of agri-food systems and the livelihoods of smallholder farming communities. Post-harvest losses is a decrease in edible food mass present in the supply chain intended for food consumption, and it occurs across the food supply chain, posing a threat to food security and livelihood sustainability. Mitigation of post-harvest losses can be a land-sparing strategy that reduces pressure to increase yields on existing agricultural lands or expand the footprint of agricultural food globally. Minimizing post-harvest loss at the household farm level contributes to overall national reductions in food availability as well as a reduction in emission caused by food loss and food waste. The main objective of this study was to determine the effectiveness of post-harvest storage technologies in reducing losses in storage facilities and at household levels. It focused on two storage technologies, that is improved physical storage and improved chemical storage, and a combination of improved physical and improved chemical storage technologies in reduction of post-harvest losses in cereals and legumes. This is because cereals and legumes are the main food produced in the country. The study involved a meta-analysis from several observations and studies compiled into an ERA dataset to determine the overall trend between the available post-harvest storage technologies that aim to reduce post-harvest losses. It showed that using the experimental storage post-harvest technologies reduced post-harvest losses in storage facilities in household levels in Malawi compared to traditional and improved storage facilities. So why Malawi? This is because Malawi was ranked 105 in the world as among countries most climate fragile based on the Global Food Security Index. FAOSTAT also reported that losses incurred in storage in a smallholder farm in Malawi are greater than those incurred in the harvesting, transport, and wholesale levels. Research methods are comparative assessment of different post-harvest load storage technologies and the reduction of post-harvest storage losses in storage facilities were analyzed using ERA dataset. The meta-analysis was run using an ERA package on RStudio to generate maps and graphs. Graphs are also generated using the ggplot package. The ERA package provided code of lines to be run to generate these outcomes. Research findings. So as you can see on the tree map on your left, pest and pathogen losses are the highest causes of post-harvest storage losses. In the second graph, the percentage change in response ratios, the RRPC gen, indicates that using the experimental treatments was better than using the control treatments. You can also see that a combination of storage improved chemical and improved physical storage has better performance when it comes to reduction of pest and pathogen losses in storage facilities compared to individual implementation of improved chemical storage and improved physical storage as seen on the graph. And improved physical storage also controls pest and pathogen losses better than improved chemical storage. This is because with time, pests and pathogens get resistant to chemical and fungicides. Food available in household. So food available in the household at harvest time in household that produces cereals and legumes for household consumption before and after post-harvest loss in storage. So according to ROMIS, the estimated post-harvest loss in storage in a household in the production season is 5%, as you can see on the table. So this is food available in a household without implementation of post-harvest storage technologies to reduce post-harvest losses in storage facilities. So with the implementation of storage post-harvest practices, more food is available in a household as seen on the table. Adoption of storage post-harvest technologies shows an increase in food available given reduction in the percentage loss in the storage facilities. Conclusion. So timely harvesting is key when it comes to storage, pest and pathogen post-harvest loss reduction. A combination of storage post-harvest reduction technologies showed more success reducing post-harvest loss in storage facilities caused by pests and pathogens. Pests and pathogens are the highest causes of post-harvest storage losses. Growth-oriented approaches starting from the smallholder have more potential to progress than in any other sector. This is because in Malawi, the largest agricultural producers are constituted by smallholder farmers who operate on not more than 5 hectares of land. So scaling up the adoption of post-harvest loss storage technologies will increase food available and improve food security in household level. Reducing post-harvest food loss is a more viable way of improving food available as opposed to acquiring additional resources in production. This is because predicting yields has become even more harder because of climate-related risks and unpredictable weather patterns. Post-harvest loss is solvable with a scaled adoption of already existing technologies. Practices and technologies already exist to aid in the reduction of post-harvest losses in storage facilities to support food security. Interventions for loss reduction should be integrated with training, policy for price regulation in early warning systems during a shortage, infrastructure and financial interventions in loss reduction. At the conclusion of my presentation, I'd like to acknowledge my NUIG supervisors, Professor Charles Spillane and Dr. Peter McKeon, and my host institution supervisors from ECRAF, Dr. Todd Drossenstock and Dr. Peter Stewart. I'd like to appreciate my friends and families for the support throughout the process of compiling this paper. Thank you.
Hi everyone, welcome to the CCAFS conference of 2021. My name is Angharad Johnston and my research project was a literature review titled Climate Proofing Tropical Forage Legumes. So a bit of background to start. Plants need nitrogen as an essential component of nucleotides, proteins and chlorophyll. However, the majority of planetary nitrogen exists in inert forms, either within the atmosphere or bound within soil organic matter. Neither is biologically available to plants and crops. It first requires fixation or mineralization by intermediate microbes. And this makes nitrogen the most commonly limiting element for crop growth and therefore agricultural output. In the mid-20th century, as part of the Green Revolution, the industrial synthesis of ammonia-based fertilizer was able to circumvent this limitation. While this increased agricultural output, we now understand it came at the expense of climate change, as it greatly increased emissions of gaseous nitrogen, essentially tipping the Earth's nitrogen cycle out of balance. So within the agroecological context, the transformations of nitrogen are both fundamental for food security and climate change mitigation outcomes. Within this context, legumes provide an attractive mechanism for sustainable nitrogen through the fixation via symbiotic microbes sequestered in their root system. Their inclusion into cropping systems and livestock feeding systems also greatly improves soil health, helping to facilitate the role of soil as the world's greatest carbon sink. So despite their multitude of benefits, legumes remain a vastly underutilized resource. Of the 18,000 known species, only a small fraction are used as forage for livestock feeding, and even then they aren't utilized to their full extent. Legume crops have lagged behind cereals, for example, in their genetic improvement over the past 20 years due to a combination of negligence in policy, low investment, and a lack of genomic resources. Also, since the Green Revolution, global meat consumption per capita has increased by approximately 20 kilograms, and global livestock production has more than quadrupled as a result. So the map here shows the areas of highest production from 2018. The areas of highest production are shown in dark blue. So Europe and North America are no longer the dominant livestock producers. Asia and South America have seen a 15-fold increase and now account for more than half of global production. Within these regions, countries with large populations and growing economies have seen the sharpest increases. This includes China, Indonesia, India, and Brazil. Towards 2050, this growth trend is expected to continue in East and Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean, which all occur in the tropical zone shown in green there. This will push feed demand to almost double and grazing intensities up by 70%. This is already reflected in the growing use of synthetic ammonia in these regions. Asia, Latin America, and Africa currently use 70% of all ammonia produced. However, they're the same regions that exhibit the most unfavorable nitrogen use efficiency. As a result of a combination of factors, including the typically acidic and weathered soils of the tropics, as well as the climatic factors, only 20 to 30% of nitrogen inputs are transferred into food. The rest is wasted as gaseous emissions and through nitrogen leaching. So my research project was developed from within this context. We aimed to address the limitations in genomic resources and policy and decision-making frameworks. Our objective was to produce a literature review for publication in the Frontiers of Sustainable Food Systems journal. Our research question was, how might we climate-proof tropical forage legumes? How can we produce crops that can cope with the projected climate changes that we expect to occur in the tropical zone? How might we also address and assess the limitations in our genomic resources? And what should be the objectives and priorities for the next phase of research towards 2050? So climate models converge on the tropics warming by between 0.1 and 1.5 degrees by 2070. We expect major changes to regional weather patterns at this 1.5 degree threshold. So crops in the tropical zone will need an overall greater heat tolerance, improved water use efficiency and/or some forms of drought tolerance or avoidance mechanisms, and physiological and morphological characteristics to cope with periods of high rainfall and nutrient leaching. As the figure there on the right shows, there are multiple functional traits that we might target, including timing of germination, growth rates, root physiology and structure, foliage structure, flowering, podding, etc. One particular aspect of climate I need to highlight is changes to wildfire. Historically, this has not been a major influence in the tropical zone. However, the increasing temperature and severity of drought will increase both the severity and frequency of fire. This is, however, not yet reflected in current literature around tropical legume genomics and tropical agriculture more broadly. So a greater utilization of legumes with fire germination strategies, for example, must be included in agriculture as part of fire recovery strategies. What this figure shows here is that we need a conceptual approach for research priorities and objectives. In addition to climate change, there are other fundamental aspects of agroecology to consider. Parallel studies of cereal crops, for example, highlight the role of external inputs. This could include irrigation, livestock herd densities and grazing strategies, the amount of available labour, land size, area, etc. It must also include natural inputs. These include soil properties, slope and elevation. All of these factors together must direct and shape the development of objectives just as much as climate. I hope to integrate these factors into a form of a matrix that will help researchers and breeders identify the most important stresses and therefore the most important agronomic traits needed for any given context. The other major finding of my research was the need for a candid assessment of the limitations of our genomic resources. So we have germplasm accessions for the groundnut, the chickpea, the pigeon pea, and the cowpea. These have been vital in providing basic information about inheritance patterns of adaptive traits and served as templates for parental line selection in downstream breeding crossing cycles. However, what must be recognized is that these germplasms will be affected by the process of domestication, which by design breeds out genetic variation in favor of selection of traits that confer higher yield. The other major objective of future germplasm collection must therefore be the integration of crop wild relatives. These will act as reservoirs of genes for stress tolerance and trait discovery for downstream breeding pipelines. So finally, just an acknowledgement of the help throughout the year from my supervisors, and just a very brief shout out to the hero and mascot of my CCAFS blog, Mr. Peanut. So thank you very much for listening, everyone, and that has been my research project for my master's program. Thank you.